Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à la Gaîté lyrique. Donc, nous sommes très heureux de vous accueillir dans le cadre de cette conférence des parties créatives que nous organisons avec Coal depuis la semaine dernière et qui dure encore jusqu'à vendredi. Tous les jours, nous vous proposons de venir ici pour participer à une table ronde qui est également suivie d'un entretien. Donc la table ronde cet après-midi s'intitule « La course à l'innovation technologique ». Et donc nous allons étudier avec un peu tous ces messieurs, car les deux dames qui étaient invitées n'ont pas pu participer. Donc on se retrouve avec une table ronde exclusivement masculine pour parler d'innovation technologique, mais voir en quoi la technique est souvent avancée comme une solution, comme la solution pour le climat. Et peut-être de critiquer un peu ce point de vue en parlant aussi de géo-ingénierie et de solutions alternatives, avec notamment des artistes qui sont invités ici cet après-midi. Et juste après la table ronde qui dure environ 2 heures, il y a un entretien qui sera mené avec Sean Glaudel, qui est un artiste australien. Donc vous pouvez rester pour toute l'après-midi. Bonne table ronde et à tout à l'heure. Merci.
So I begin with two apologies. The first is being typically English. I didn't understand a word of that, but I think Clémence might have alluded to my second apology, and that is that we are an all-male panel, which in this day and age is inexcusable. It wasn't meant to be like this. We were expecting 2 women on our panel who unfortunately couldn't be with us, so apologies. Even then, maybe that wasn't enough. So that's 2 apologies to begin with. What we're going to do is hear from each of our speakers who have common interests but come at this issue of the role and potential of technological innovation in solving these era-defining problems of like climate change from very different perspectives, and hopefully through that we will learn something from each other and move forward just a little bit. We're going to hear from each of them in turn and then open it up for discussion. First, we're going to hear from my friend and colleague Kevin Anderson, who is a climate scientist whose role in the climate debate has become one of a sort of the moral conscience of the climate science community for the simple reason that he refuses to dilute his analysis to make it palatable to what politicians and others wish to hear. Then we're going to hear from Cedric Carl and Thomas Ortiz, and then from Yassine. My apologies, I haven't learned how to pronounce your surname yet. And then we're going to hear from Ewan, and then we're going to hear finally from Paul Allen from the Centre for Alternative Technology, who is looking at how people are already delivering dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in the face of climate change around the world. But to set the scene, we're talking about technological innovation, which itself is a little political. Whenever we are faced by problems of this scale, we seem to hope for and reach for magic bullet technologies. Few people remember that the very idea of the magic bullet itself comes from a German fairy tale in which a huntsman makes a deal with the devil to find the bullet that will always find its mark. What comes out in the story is that the last bullet he is given, he has no control over, and the devil controls that one. Whenever we reach for technology, there are unpredictable and emergent consequences. Every technology carries with it a sort of DNA for the society in which it operates, so it's our challenge to think through what it does. For example, do we go for large-scale, very centralized energy-generating systems that are under corporate control, or do we go for highly decentralized, community-controlled renewables? Do we have to have both? Will both alone, without other social changes, be enough? In our food systems, we hear great promise from the genetic modification of crops. But what about the role of farmer and community-scale agroecological solutions to an insecure food system in a warming world? All these big issues, which speak to the stories we tell ourselves about technology, on the one hand of the possibility of a bright new tomorrow, and on the other side of a sort of Frankenstein's monster. The reality probably is somewhere in between. But just to set the scale, I thought I would mention one of the great green philosophers, E.F. Schumacher, who introduced us to the concept of appropriate technology. And right at the other end of the political scale of a former Prime Minister of Britain, Winston Churchill, who loved technology but always believed that scientists should be on tap but not on top. And with that, I introduce Kevin Anderson, who is at least on top of his subject, to give us a bit of the big picture. Kevin.
Thank you very much. Now, come up on the screen up there, do we know? Up on the screen up there? Oh, it is. Okay, sorry. Right, okay. In typical scientist fashion, I'm going to be using technology because I'm lost without it. So I'm going to be focusing on 2 degrees C, carbon budgets and mitigation. Really, a lot of what I'm talking about here are the sorts of things that have been discussed in detail at the COP just down the road, and this presentation, something similar, was put out just recently. In fact, I had our major event just yesterday. I'm going to start off by just saying what we are all committed to. This is the Copenhagen Accord, but the same thing has been signed up to every single year since 2009. And I think it's worth bearing in mind what it has to say. We are signed up to hold the increase in global temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. Notice that it doesn't say a 50-50 chance of, it says below. In other words, a good chance of it. It is supposed to be consistent with science and on the basis of equity. Now, the Paris events have INDCs, which are voluntary pledges given by governments. They have nothing to do with 2 degrees centigrade. They are in no way related to science, and no concept of equity is included in those. So the Paris negotiations are starting off completely removed from what every leader has signed up to for the last, well, at least the last 6 years, which I mean, it's already quite a sad indictment before we even started the Paris COP. Set against this commitment that we made and repeatedly fail on, it's worth bearing in mind that the first IPCC report came out in 1990, a quarter of a century ago, which looking around here is probably longer ago than some people here have been alive. So we've spent 25 years of doing absolutely nothing on climate change. The carbon dioxide emissions since the last IPCC report are 200 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is changing the climate for the next 100 to 10,000 years. The carbon dioxide emissions this year in 2015 will be 60% higher than when we first pretended to care about climate change in 1990, 60% higher. And the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is higher than it's ever been for at least 800,000 years, which is 3 times longer than any human has been on the planet. Not any human, but the human species has been on the planet, rather. So this is a catalogue of abject failure on climate change that people of my generation and Andrew's generation and Paul's generation all take some significant responsibility for, basically rich white men. So what has significantly changed with the latest IPCC report? Well, in terms of temperature, in terms of 2 degrees C, it is all now about carbon budgets. This has a scientific basis, unlike the spurious nonsense that we've heard for years, which are about long-term targets, what we can do by 2050. Carbon budgets have direct political repercussions that none of us particularly like, but they are based on science. Now, whilst my talk is quite negative, I remain very positive, well, not very positive, I remain of the view that we can just about hold to 2 degrees centigrade, just. The probabilities are not good, but this is the best that we can probably achieve. And if anyone wants to ask me later, I think that the 1.5 degrees C temperature rise is no longer viable. It hasn't been viable for quite a long time. That's not to say we shouldn't try to push for it in the agreement, but it's not scientifically viable. To deliver on 2 degrees C, the first thing we need are deep, very deep reductions in energy demand, and that will bring our emissions down. And bear in mind that 50% of global emissions come from 10% of the world's population, and the top 1% of emitters in the US emit over 2,500 times more, 2,500 times more than the bottom 1%. So emissions are hugely skewed towards people who are very wealthy. The argument often is, can we not do it with technology? Can we not do it with low carbon energy supply, with hydro, wind, nuclear, CCS, all of these great technologies? Can we not resolve the problem with those rather than having to reduce energy demand with big political repercussions? The problem is that we are well into our carbon budget. It is now 2015 and we have squandered almost all of our carbon budget for 2 degrees centigrade. We have very little left. So if we think about this graphically, now you don't have to worry if you don't like graphs, then just look at the shape of the curve. Carbon emissions up the side, years along the bottom. This is the emissions we've had since we first pretended to care about climate change. Look, it just keeps going up and up, whether it's the Copenhagen Accord or the Rio agreements, the emissions just keep rising. We've had an economic downturn, but the global emissions have continued to rise. Now this year, actually, and last year, they look like they might broadly have stabilised, certainly less than 1% growth. But there's no reason, when you look at that in detail, which you can ask me about later if you want to, whether that is unlikely to persist. The reasons for that reduction are unlikely to persist. Nevertheless, the rate of growth will probably reduce from what it has been historically. But when we continue to build things, we build buildings like this, a sunny day in Paris, and the lights are on, and we're in a room with no windows. So when we build power stations that have high carbon outputs, like the UK building 25 new gas-fired power stations, when we build roads, rail networks, when we build buildings like this one, or like where the COP is being held, which are very high carbon buildings, when we build aircraft and ships, we lock the future into 30 to 100 years, at least, of using those infrastructures. And that is what we're doing right now as we build all of this high carbon infrastructure. We are locking my future, your future, and the next generation's future into a high carbon infrastructure. We are aiming towards a 4 degrees C global average rise, which is a huge, huge shift. It's like living on another planet. Now, if you look at the INDCs, these intended nationally distributed contributions, otherwise known as voluntary pledges, if you take those into account, if you assume that no negative emissions, negative emission technologies will not work in the future, and I'll come back to those, then we are aiming for about 4 degrees C. Now, what happens if we want to aim for 2 degrees C? And let's be blunt, 2 degrees C will mean that many people will die. They will be poor, and they will live in the southern hemisphere, and they will be low emitting, and they will typically be non-white. And if we're really clear about this, those of us that have emitted the carbon dioxide, which are generally rich, or normally white people, not always, often in the northern hemisphere, we have not cared, and we still do not care, particularly about the people who will be impacted by our activities. Nevertheless, I'm going to pretend we do care for now. This part of the curve is too early to solve with low carbon supply. This is the bit that's politically challenging. We cannot move from the high emissions profile we're on now to the low emissions one by building our way out of it fast enough. And now, I'm going to quickly check this. I spoke this through with Andrew earlier. This is just a quick test. Is that assumption reasonable? Can we not build our way out of the problem? I'm going to look at nuclear power here, which obviously a lot of in France, about 80% of your electricity, I think. I'm agnostic about it. It's low carbon. It has lots of problems. Let's not pretend otherwise. I don't want to get into those, but from a carbon perspective, it is very low carbon emissions. It's about the same as renewables are life cycle-wise. So it's low carbon. And a lot of people have proposed it. Hanson's proposed it. Quite a lot of environmentalists now say it's a real positive way forward. But let's think about it. Put it in some perspective. 11.5% of the world's electricity comes from nuclear. 2.5% of the energy we consume is from nuclear. 2.5%. The other 97.5% are not nuclear. There are 435 nuclear power stations that provide that power. Let's imagine nuclear could provide a useful supply of low-carbon energy. Let's imagine that 25% of current demand was going to be for nuclear power. We would have to build about 2,500 new nuclear power stations in the next 20 years or so, and we are currently building 70. There is no way you could build that many. There were not enough nuclear engineers. There were not enough facilities to do it. There's probably not enough money for doing it as well. There were lots of issues over planning, and there may be not enough uranium-235 to power those power stations anyway. So it just puts it in perspective. You cannot build your way out of it. And when scientists often say they can, it's because they're very poor engineers. They're scientists and not engineers. We do need to have low carbon supply, but in the interim, we have to have deep cuts in energy demand. And that is by people like me, probably people like Andrew, and probably some of you here. And if you're not in that group of high emitters now, most of you here will be aspiring to be in that group, no doubt. We do need low carbon supply as well. That is a prerequisite. It's absolutely essential, but you need both of those together. But this is a global analysis, and we are signed up to do our part in the wealthy parts of the world on the basis of equity. So let's imagine the poorer parts of the world could do something really radical. Let's imagine they could peak their emissions in 2025. That is far more stringent than anyone's talking about in Paris. And then have very rapid reductions in carbon dioxide emissions by the early 2030s, 10% per annum, 3 times faster than people like Stern have said is possible with economic growth. They would have to have a zero carbon energy system by 2050. This is for, remember, India, China, Tanzania, the poorer parts of the world as well. This is far beyond what anything is talked about in Paris. But if you work that out, you can work out the carbon budget for that. We know the carbon budget for 2 degrees C. You take one away from the other, just a bit of basic maths, and that tells you what do wealthy people like us have to do. We would have to have a 10%, at least, a 10% per annum reduction in our emissions starting now. Starting really in 2011. That means about a 40% reduction before 2020, a a 70% reduction by the mid-2020s, and virtually zero carbon by the early 2030s for people like us. That's not zero carbon electricity, that's our planes, our ships, our electricity, our cars, our complete energy system. That's for a middle to outside chance of avoiding dangerous climate change, which will anyway kill lots of poor people. You look at the emission submission from the EU to Paris, it's for a 40% reduction by 2030, less than half of what would be necessary for 2 degrees centigrade. So how can all of this be reconciled with the official accounts? This is from the IPCC chair. To keep to a good chance of 2 degrees C, emissions should fall to zero, notice there, or below. Or below is a particular technology they're talking about. It's one that will suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in the future. Always watch out for the words. The words hide the technology. This is from the Working Group 3 chair, looking at mitigation. The costs of mitigation would be so low that global economic growth would not be strongly affected. If you don't say that, your reports don't get published. This is from the UK to provide a wealthy country perspective here. For 2 degrees C, we have to reduce emissions. The good news is reductions of that size are possible without sacrificing the benefits of economic growth and rising prosperity. We have to remember here that economics and finance and politics trump physics. They're more important than physics. We adjust our physics to fit with our economics, rather than, I would suggest, the other way around is probably more realistic. How is this working? There are two rabbits in the hat, two technologies here. The first of these is negative emission technologies. This basically means sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. This is primarily by growing trees around the world and plants in very large levels, similar to planting the whole of India or twice the size of India in plants and then harvesting that every year. This will absorb CO2 during photosynthesis. You burn the trees in power stations, you capture the carbon dioxide in the chimney, you liquefy the carbon dioxide and you pump it somewhere very deep underground and store it there without leaking for the next few thousand years. Yeah. The other technology makes that one look quite reasonable, and the other technology is we have to peak global emissions in the past. I think that's even more challenging. Let's think about the first one of these. It has never worked at scale. There are huge technological and economic unknowns. There are massive efficiency penalties. There is limited availability of biomass of plants, because most of us would also like to eat, so we're trying to feed 7 to 9 billion people at the same time. And you have to hope that in the interim, when our emissions continue to rise, that you have your fingers crossed that some of the positive feedbacks that make the situation worse, like the melting of the permafrost, will not occur. The second of these technologies, peaking in the past, requires a time machine. Now, unless you're Doctor Who, I'm not sure if anyone actually has one of those. So this is a sort of technological utopia. It's worth bearing in mind here, just to put some reality into this, well, reality, some context, of the IPCC scenarios, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change scenarios, there are 400 there for a reasonable chance of 2 degrees C. 86% of those assume negative emission technologies will suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in 2050 to 2070. The other 14% assume that we can peak emissions in the past, and actually most, or many, if not most of those scenarios assume both of those technologies will work. And that's the underpinning science that we're using for advising policymakers. Let's go back to 2 degrees C, the last few slides here. Is it still viable? Yes, in my view it is. So I think it is just about viable. It will require huge changes in behaviour, in our attitudes and our routines and our habits of the small group of people that are responsible for the lion's share of the emissions. So that is a big behavioural shift that is not directly technologically focused. There are big technological opportunities on the demand side. So there's lots we can do in demand because we replace our technologies much quicker, but we have to watch out for the rebound effect. Whatever we do that's more efficient, we spend the money on an extra flight or some other behaviour. And we have to question the concept of growth. To assume that growth in the way that we've measured it is compatible with 2 degrees C is not mathematically possible, and that's why you need the negative emission technologies to hold those together. There are two phases for 2 degrees C, in my view. The first one of these are deep reductions in energy demand, starting now and over the next 20 years. And this is by high emitters, principally, people like me and other people at COP. And the second one is that we need a Marshall-style plan to build zero carbon energy, not low carbon, zero carbon energy. And we really need to have that in place fully by 2050 if we're serious about 2 degrees centigrade. In the end, we have to escape the reductionist shackles that we are taught at universities and schools that has been very successful in the 20th century if we're ever to solve the systemic problems that we face in the 21st century. And at the moment, COP and most of the way we think about these things is using 20th century ways of thinking to solve 21st century problems. This will demand leadership, courage, innovative thinking, engaged teams and difficult choices. We will get lots of things wrong because we have no historical precedence for this, and there'll be lots of pain by people like me and the other high emitters who will have to make significant sacrifices to what we would normally see as the quality of our life in the short term to help the quality of the life of the poorer people around the planet. And a final message of hope, this is from Robert Unger, at every level, the greatest obstacle to transforming the world is that we lack the clarity and imagination to concede that it could be different. And that's what we need here. We need imagination of a low-carbon future, and we need to have some clarity around that as to what that would actually look like to advise the policymakers. And on that upbeat note, thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Fantastic, thank you very much. If that left you, in spite of that sort of little upbeat flourish at the end, full of despair, don't worry. Our final speaker of this session will tell you how we will get zero carbon by 2050. And in the meantime, you never know, Cedric and Thomas may have in their fascinating looking literature here information about a time machine. I don't know. We'll find out. Over to you.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, we have this with Thomas and many people, this paleo-energetic project. Because first, to begin, we work for, I think, 15 years on energy education, climate change problem. We conceive tools for schools and for the public people, enterprise, etc. We run a project for making the parties in the public spaces. We run with solar energy and bicycle for DJing and concert, etc. We also make research program on fuel poverty, and now on this smart grid, but with a lot of criticism position. And
but no time machine yet.
Yeah, the time machine is because of all this research program. We look for a lot for innovation, etc. And we discovered there is not enough story of energy. We need more, you know, to have this on a real databasis. And so we say we have to make our own project. So we start this project, Paleo-Energetic, 6 months ago, but we think about 1 year about this and more. And we make a really simple crowdsourcing website that you can see on the screen. And the people can send a picture, invention. Also, we want to take social innovation. In this size, we want to have this also artistic piece and work. And there is 3 goals of this project. First is to see public domain invention, because this doesn't interest industry, because industry just want to have patents, you know. And today, with the open source movement and the sharing economy movement, we think we have to reinvent the public domain and to exhumate all this invention, because we need this. And so the second goal is to have this sociology approach of energy and history, because like this we can understand why it works or why it doesn't work sometimes. And the best is to see also the website, because when you send something to us, we say exhumate by, and your picture go into the team. And we want to make this research team more bigger and bigger. For example, it's in France for the moment, but we think each territory in the world have its own innovators, small invention, and really social innovation too.
Yes, so I think the best is to show you some of those innovations that were sent by the community. So I'm sorry, this part of the website is in French, but don't worry, we are going to explain with our amazing British accent. So on the website you have this timeline, and the people they send the innovation they found or they know. And then the innovation is added on the timeline, and so as a visitor of the website you can scroll and really explore this parallel story of energy through those innovations that are usually not in the history books. So
sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. One of our gold nuggets in this project is this solar concentrator invented by Mouchot, a teacher in France in the 18th century. And he was doing this crazy solar printer in 1882. They was printing solar newspaper inside Paris. So you can see there is the solar concentrator working with the steam engine and running a press. And they was printing 500 newspaper by hour, only with this machine. And we are now looking for this paper printed because it's true, it's the true story. We have also papers from this age that we find on the antiques shop, etc. So we try always to make proof of what we have virtually in this website. Also because in the web you can find really strange stories and fake stories, but we also try to be inside the real life. And in this time, these people met this French writer called Émile Zola, who was writing Germinal, this big story about mining and social fighting, you know. And Émile Zola wrote this book, it's true. It's called Travail, after meeting these people. And Travail is an anticipation book about a society, about a collaborative society working with solar energy. Because in this time, Auguste Mouchot was telling, after mining, there is no coal anymore, so we must use solar energy. It was more than 100 years ago. So
the really interesting things with this is that we encourage the community not just sending like technical innovation or inventions, but also could be like these books or art piece, and because we want to talk about the global ecosystem that surround the innovation, and because there is a context, there is a lot of people working on several topics at the same time, and we think that the transdisciplinarity is really interesting and important to understand if an innovation is going to work or not.
Another nugget is this one with the hydrogen in the 50s.
The real trip of the time we are.
Yeah. This one. Yeah. We find this because we find another invention because people use in the 70s in France solar concentrator to make hydrogen to run a car. And before this, in the same territories, there was these two guys making hydrogen with a mill, a water mill, and moving this German bus for 5 years. So I mean, there was no website. I think perhaps there was a community of innovators, and they meet the people in Paris, you know, in fair or something. I don't know, but I think there is not only one project like this, and we see already in this project that when there is wartime, there is more innovation about energy, because you know all the war and the army take all the fuel and all the energy, and so the people they just have to innovate. If not, they are not able to work anymore. So this is really interesting. The people making hydrogen truck in this time without a lot of technology. And yeah, we think also that is really interesting to go to the past to see what was happening, because we think the future is low tech. Why? Because if we try to move all this energy problem by new technology, solar panel, wind, but with a lot of rare metal inside and stuff like this, we are not able to face the problem. So we have to look also with low-tech technology and to look for our resource to make this happen. If not, it's not matching.
Yeah. So just to show you, so this part of the website is the team section. So it's getting pretty big actually in a really few amount of time. There is a lot of different people. We have students, we have a researcher in sociology, we have scientists, retired people. So the idea is really to create a research community that is made of a lot of different backgrounds and people in order to make the product and the final product pretty broad. So if you send something, then we will add you on this community page with your little picture and a little sentence.
And what is important also, we can go to a news and exhibition. We have done a low-tech version of this website. We have a physical freeze that we move from place to place, and the people, they just, there is a paper, and they just can participate with a normal pen and put this on the freeze. And we have done many exhibition, and all the people really get into the project. And what we think is the memory of the energy innovation are in the old mind. So we want to go in retreat place, or to ask people from the gas and the electric industry that are they are in retreat, but they really are interested to share also what they know. And I think we want to open the different antenna in different countries and territories.
And especially the idea of opening another antenna is that we think that those treasures, as the lot of innovation, they are not on internet, they are just in the people's mind or books or in memory. So it's a really local treasure we have to dig on special place, and so that's why the idea of opening maybe one in UK and Europe and other countries could be a best idea to create a global network of crowdsourcing of lost innovations.
Okay, thank you very much. So it turned out that you really did have a time travel machine after all. You took us back into the past. And listening to your examples, it reminded me that long before the internal combustion engine came along, people were experimenting with electric cars, which were then forgotten about for decades.
There is many on the website. You have to have a look.
And so let's change the tone again and go straight to Yassine. Yassine.
Thank you. So I use this time machine as well because at the beginning of the century I was really into technology, and I'm a media artist, so I used all the growth of the digital technologies for more than 15 years, something like that. And today I came back to the low tech, as you said. The low tech is the future, because my technology today is the one we could use centuries ago, coming back to the very first arts. And in the same time, I don't have the feeling to go back to something. I think this is something logical, and we are going into a certain direction. And in the same time, for me, this is also the future of digital technologies. The curve that you show, maybe I will show some images with the, or not. Yeah, maybe show some images. So the curve that you show about the climate, I show this curve very often. In fact, it's exactly the same curve that is used in the Moore's law, you know, the law of computers. And I don't see this comparison very often, but if you think about it, we have the same acceleration. We have the acceleration in digital technologies and the acceleration in the climate. And in the climate situation and the acceleration of heat. And I really believe that we used this energy because it's a huge amount of energy that we spent in the last century, and this energy gave us to humanity a kind of superpower, and we continue to use this superpower, and it's exactly the same growth of the technology. And the problem is that today, and the terms that we are talking about, to 2030, 2050, are in technology are the years where the curve becomes vertical. So this is really a moment that is about something like magic. Like every day, the technology doubles. You know, the power of computers doubles every day. This is an exponential growth. And it's very interesting because this is something abstract, because we see with climate that we can't go, we don't have enough energy to go into that direction. So to come back to my example, what I do is a kind of digital art as well, because I believe, and it's very important because this is also the model of the pyramid, you know, the model of the pyramid, the way we build the communities for centuries. We have a leader, and then we have 2 sub-leaders, then 4, then 16, then all of us, okay? And today, 67 people have more money than the rest of the planet. 67 people. So we can name it, we can name them. They probably have represented at the COP, and they are very powerful, and we made them powerful. And with the digital technologies, we created something that is, in fact, very organic, because we are all connected together. We are all on networks and sub-networks, and we can communicate very quickly. And it created a kind of link, a human link, and not something only technological. So I come back. I don't have slides, a precise slide. I show my work in the same time, and you will see that is related. So the name of this character is Helix, and you know Helix in English? It's helix. It's like the DNA helix, something that we all share, and it's helix with a Y and X, like the chromosome. And so this little guy lives in our reality. So he's playing with our reality, and is trying to be universal through 3 very simple common points we all share. The first one is the drawing, because each of us did draw one day. You know, if you ask people, they say, I don't know to draw. Okay, it's not a problem. When you're a kid, you draw before you talk. It's really an expression, a media. The second common point is that we all, before to be adult, we were kids. And when you're a kid, you have this freedom and incredible power to use your imagination, because in the same time, you learn reality, you can mix and invent things and tell stories, and this is something, I think, a switch, an invisible switch we have on us, and that we can just turn on. And the third common point I work with Helix is the smile. Because the smile is something you can all do. You have 17 muscles on your face, and you can smile, and everyone can smile. But it's not just something pleasant, it's also a media, because when you smile, you make smile, and the people make smile, and it's like a vibration. It's like something that drives you into a certain state, and this is like the first sentence to the story you want to tell. If you're very aggressive to the people, you can tell the truth behind, you will be wrong. That's the experience. That's also why it's sometimes it's not so well used, and especially by politicians. But a very sincere smile, because you see life as it was given to you, is a very, very powerful tool. So what we see right now is the cover of the calendar of the COP, so that the representative of the COP have. And so what I was talking about in the relation with the digital is the fact that every day I take these pictures, I draw my character, and I take the picture and I share it on the social networks. So in a few years, it became a kind of virtual character, because you don't have to be a real person to be a digital person. So it became a person, and the people started to follow him. And a few years later, he became also the first digital ambassador for the United Nations, because of this universal aspect and the fact that he could send the messages without the words. And so every day, not every day, but today, for instance, is the International Anti-Corruption Day. So I did a drawing on this subject, and there are many of these drawings. And for instance, I did also a version of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the Sustainable Development Goals that are still going on. And so it's a very, very powerful tool to tell the stories. And so this is a presentation of what I do and the way I use the technology and the way I think about the climate, and I will be open, of course, to tell more in the discussion.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Yassine. And when you talk about children's imagination and the possibilities for doing things differently, it always reminds me, I have a young daughter, and whenever we walk around London where I live, and there's a building site, and it's rubble, and you're not sure what it's going to be, we always have this conversation. I ask her, what do you think it will be? And she says, it will be a playground, it will be a park, it will be a swimming pool. And unfortunately, every time, because of the exorbitant power of finance in the City of London, it is not. It's luxury flats every time. But her optimism is not yet dimmed. And speaking of optimism, optimism that can carry you into the air, we'll now hear from Ewan.
Hello, thank you. I have to set up a bit for the images. Can you...
This is the other reason why the future has to be low-tech, because we've all been to so many conferences where, with the best will in the world, it never always works. I gave up on PowerPoint about 5 years ago.
I will try to show. Let's see if it... Yeah, it works. Okay, good. Thank you, Andrew. So I would try to... I will start with something very old in the 90s. It's called the Autonomous Astronauts. It was a collective international network of people in, let's say, in the period of like Reclaim the Streets and Seattle and all this. We were having a network of artists, scientists, activists concerned about the militarization of space, the commercial development of space technology. At that time, it was, you know, the beginning of the X Prize, Virgin, and all these companies starting to after Soviet Union and so on. So we started as building this network, and UK, Italy, France, New Zealand, many people. And I will start with this and go what we do today. And I will just show you a few of examples of what we did in the past. So this was late 90s, this work. I published this book, and it's for people who want to know a little more. It's a French book. And after that, in the year, let's say 2005, we wanted to go more practical. So we built this station. It was called Macrolab, and it was, we were working on a self-sustained, let's say, a living machine with solar panels, windmill, and we were also recycling water, trying to. This photo is on a small island in the Venice lagoon. So we will set the Macrolab for a few months in a place we did in Scotland in 2002 in the islands, and this was in Venice. We were hosting scientists working on the field. And here it was also to study the pollution of the water lagoon, lagoon water, sorry. And recycling at what level we could desalinate, filter it, and would it be able to drink it, cook with it. So it was a whole complex living machine, because there were also some living quarter in it, and hosting about 10 people. So we worked like few years in that level. And I tried to panel what I've done in the last years. And after that, with some other colleague, because I work as a journalist, curator, and collective project as artist. After that, we started in those years to think about geoengineering as a really big issue, and we started a journal called the Laboratory Planet. If you see on it, it's written, it's a bit small, but it's written like Laboratory Planet, the 56 years means starting in 45, because Anthropocene, like the era of the influence of humans, it's supposed now to be dated as 45, the first atomic bomb. So we were saying, like, since 45, we live in a laboratory planet, like experiments at scale 1. It's not, they're not confined in labs. So we were doing this journal, let's say, putting together scientists, philosophers, science anthropologists to try to, let's say, describe this laboratory planet. So this is the first issue. It was called, so the title was, Why Are We Working for Our Own Obsolescence? We chose the journal format also because we really wanted to spread it more around. So we printed 10,000 copies in English, 10,000 in French. And that was one of the big ideas to do like tabloid journal, and also as artists, like playing with this idea of the Daily Planet, like Superman, mad scientist kind of journal. So this is issue 1. I can already show you briefly the other issues. The number 2 was more, so the first one was like obsolescence. Number 2 was more, let's say, colonization of the inner body. And here, like how the cyborgs learn to stop worrying and love surveillance. Molecule of combat, like during, this was just the time of the war in Iraq. So it was all the medication soldiers are taking, like for not sleeping and so on. So this was issue 2. And the third one was about geoengineering and polar geopolitics. So it was called the terminal phase of nihilism. So it was 10 years ago, imagine. We're still in this problem. Like geoengineering from atom bomb to rising water level. So a series of texts, and we are now preparing number 5 to be released in February. Also dealing more with, let's say, politics of the xeno, the aliens, the strangers, also the climate wars, climate refugees, xenophobia in France, and so on. And also in xeno, in economy, in biology. And so this is the next issue. And to go more faster. What I want to talk about, it's an action. It connects with the autonomous astronaut somehow. It's an action we did. I can show you a journal. Where is it? Le journal Aérocène. C'est pas grave. I will show you some images. Yeah. So, yeah. This is a project presented in the COP, and we did an action in. If we talk about 1945, the atomic bomb was first tested in Trinity Point in New Mexico, and so you see some photos here of the action. So I joined this initiative launched by artist Thomas Saraceno called Aeroscene. It's also how to develop zero carbon balloon transportation. Means with not even burners, using only the heat of the sun and the infrared of the ground, of the earth, with like black balloons like this, to fly without any, burning any gas. And so it was the first registered solar balloon. I mean, it's important to say registered because you need, for Montgolfier, you need to go in the logbook of specific like hot air balloons. So it's the first one to be registered as like no aerosolar, using no gas burner. And we did the action of the first launch, so it was 3 weeks ago. And we did it in White Sands in New Mexico, because for this symbolic situation, because White Sands is a place for the first atomic bomb, as I said. It's also, so in 1945, it was also the first American rockets, and then the Nazi V2s that were brought there to be tested. And from that junction, from the nuclear bomb and the rockets, they made the intercontinental ballistic missiles there. So we wanted to show, to make this symbolic action in White Sands for that. And yeah, maybe I'll show you a little video. Just a nice video. Where is the balloon? So it's a 360 video. Yeah, so, yeah. Non, pas besoin. Oui, mais yeah, there's no so much sounds. Just filmed in 360. So it's in, you can go online, it's called Aeroscene and Space Without Rockets on YouTube. And you can go 360 in the video. And so 1945, White Sands, it's beginning of this nuclear era, but it's also today where the private sectors, Virgin Galactic, the space tourism industry, just constructed a spaceport, as they call it, Spaceport America. It's so it's just 30 miles west of the desert, the White Sands Desert, and yeah, sorry. Oh. And so the action was also to try to point the question of space tourism as a very big polluting and almost a geoengineering question. I can go on some press article. Because today you have like 70, 80 rockets per year. But rockets, when they go through the stratosphere, they release a lot of black carbon, so-called soot, this hoven, yeah, de la suie en français. So they release a lot of this. And if you imagine the private sector of like space industry, so Virgin, but also Blue Origin, I don't know, SpaceX, if you imagine there will be like, let's say, how they said we're going to have like 100 flights per year in the next 5 years or something for this or that company. So if you imagine like 1,000 space tourism or space private sector industry going up just over the stratosphere or in suborbital or whatever. So then there was a study, so here in the article in the press, there was a study, what would be the consequences on climate change. They realized like this black carbon release, because black carbon when it's the airplanes, somehow it's washed out after 5-10 days and falls on Earth. But in the stratosphere, it stays for 10 or 20 years. So I'm not going too much in details, we can search online. The study says like, okay, 1,000 flights over New Mexico in a year, it will be releasing black carbon like never, and it will stay like a gray cloud around the Earth. So of course, sun will not cross and so on. So it will be like something like from plus 0.4 to plus 1 something in the polar regions, some minus in the tropical regions, but the effect will be really like a kind of geoengineering impact. So there have been only a few studies, but it was quite something talking to us. So that's why we did this action specifically nearby this venue to kind of raise this question, because you know it's people are so cynical. Look, this article, Richard Branson from Virgin Galactic, like from climate change we can make money, but in the meantime, is with this spaceship two engines and propellants are releasing such a crazy big amount of black carbon, or would do it in the stratosphere. So that was the Eros in action is about.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have to apologize for Richard Branson coming from the United Kingdom. He is a man who uniquely able to position himself as an advocate of action on climate change and as an advocate for aviation expansion and space travel. He is the most extraordinary individual. But to finish on an unmitigatingly, I choose my words carefully, positive note, we're going to go over to Paul, who from a small place in a remote part of Wales, from what used to be a quarry, they are leading the world in innovation around renewable energy technologies, but more than that, thinking about how socially and in real living circumstances, it can bring more than just the benefit of low carbon electricity, but improve people's lives as well. Normally when you see Paul, he will have with him an accordion or a penny whistle or a harp. Unfortunately, he has none of those today, but his voice is just as sweet. So over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you. The Centre for Alternative Technology is based around the concept of alternative technology. It's rethinking the sort of connection between human beings and technology to make technology work better for the citizen, but also to bring it within what the planet can bear. And the concept grew really from 1968, from the Paris uprisings, when before that time, all scientists were heroes, but from then we began to see that technology was butting up against the physical limits of the planet. So we began to think about a different relationship with technology. So from really 74, we occupied and adopted a derelict slate quarry and began creating a living laboratory to sort of test out new relationships between human beings and technology. Now, round about sort of 2004, 2005, we got wind of how serious the climate change threat was. So we began pulling together all we'd learned over the sort of 30, 40 years into a scenario that could begin to explore how we could actually decarbonize at the sort of rates that Kevin Anderson was suggesting at the beginning, looking at how we can get to zero emissions in 2 decades. Now, when we sit here and we listen to what's going on outside, we can hear there's a huge rumble of noise of traffic and stuff, because actually what's happening outside isn't normal. This isn't a normal day in France. This is an extreme energy day, because if we look back over any sort of timeline, going back to 1950, 1940, 1930, we just see the amount of energy per head has just gone up and up and up and up. So we've actually been ushered into living an extreme energy lifestyle today by very clever marketing, because selling more energy is more profitable, encouraging us to buy more goods imported from around the world is more profitable. So we've been coaxed into an extreme energy lifestyle. So the core of Zero Carbon Britain is to help us recognize that and begin to power down our energy demand by using energy a lot smarter and using energy for what we actually need it for. So in the model, we show we can reduce energy demand by 60%, while still maintaining modern lifestyles by having personal transport and warm buildings and good food that's actually better for us than what we eat today. Then when we've got a smart, lean approach to energy, we can also at the same time begin to ramp up renewable energy, 100% renewable energy to power Britain. And we've modeled that several times in increasing detail. The last model used literally 10 years of hourly data modeling supply and demand to make sure we can keep the lights on, identifying energy storage technologies that can help fill the gaps. And in that process, we talked to all sorts of different energy modelers from other parts of the world who were doing rapid decarbonisation modelling to help us understand what we need to do. And then by the end of sort of last year, it became really obvious to me that we need to pull together all of the good work that's been done all around the world into one place so everybody can find it and everybody can access it. So we began a program that produced this report called Who's Getting Ready for Zero, which pulls together over 100 scenarios from around the world, from America, from Australia, from Morocco, Ethiopia, Denmark, not just at national level, but also what's happening on the ground at city level. And then you can click on the hot links and zoom around the world looking at all of this wonderful work. And what it shows is we have all the technologies we need to do this. We're not waiting for any new eco widget to be developed. And so that it kicks the ball forward so we can see the actual barrier to change isn't waiting for a new technology. It's actually cultural and political. And admittedly, we do have to change how millions of people live. I mean, we know that. We have no choice. We have to do that. But changing how millions of people live doesn't have any one single barrier that you overcome it and it just happens. There are sociological barriers, there are psychological barriers, there are legal barriers, there are economic barriers, there are cultural barriers. So the research that we're involved with at the moment is a new research phase called Zero Carbon Making It Happen, where we're pulling together into a similar report, not just the technology, but the psychology, the sociology, lessons from history. So we'll be able to circulate that. We presented it within the UN COP last week, and it's now available to download for free as the initial findings. The next 9 months as we roll on from Paris, we're going to be looking in more depth at what are these barriers and how we overcome them. So that's called Zero Carbon Making It Happen. You can download that from the website too and feed in your ideas, because it's very important that we engage with arts and culture as well. And they aren't just tacked on the bottom, but they're core, because we've had cultural shifts. How we've thought about things like gender, like race, like health and safety. Quite often the shifts have been up against corporate interests, but when we have cultural shifts triggered by creative interventions from the arts and technology, arts and culture, creative thinkers that help us think in a different way, then once that wave happens through society, then politics has to follow. I mean, I never thought we'd see a leader of the right-wing Conservative Party stand up and say, I support same-sex marriage. But because there's been a cultural shift about attitudes now, the parties have to follow that. So that's what we're offering, really, as a sort of tool. We've run it in sessions called Case for Optimism, where we've brought artists together. We took it to a playwright who interviewed us all and created an afternoon theatre BBC play about a family going through that transition. We've produced a report for the Arts Council of Wales called Culture Shift, looking at the power of creativity to help us think differently about things. And in some ways, we can create a time machine. We can look at the little dappled rays of the zero-carbon future that we have here now, but using creativity, arts, and story, we can link that up. and enable people to walk into a zero-carbon future in 20 years' time, so they can begin to see what we're all eating, what we're wearing, how we're getting ourselves about, what we're doing to amuse ourselves in a zero-carbon future, so that it removes the fears and barriers that quite often the climate deniers will say, oh, what these green people are saying is we've all got to live in caves and eat insects off the wall. We can show that we can actually live exciting modern lives, actually perhaps more creative lives, because in that sense of collective purpose, we might discover something new about ourselves that we've been yearning for quite a long time.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I thought just a kind of one question to all of you to get things going. Paul talked about the need for creative thinking. Well, one of the great creative thinkers in the earlier wave of thinking about the environment, Ivan Illich, wrote in Tools for Conviviality and Energy and Equity that there was a better life to be had with low energy lifestyles rather than high energy lifestyles, even if high energy lifestyles were possible. You've all talked about the need for new approaches to technology. Quite a few of you have said you favor a sort of low technology approach. But the big story, which seems to be hanging over the climate talks, is about whether or not there can be a magic bullet technology, and as Kevin pointed out, built into so many of the models which are being relied upon by the decision makers is the magic bullet of geoengineering, and what probably chiefly among that, carbon capture and storage. So maybe the question to all of you is that if the technology could do it, would it be okay to keep going on as we are anyway? I think I'll go to Kevin first on that.
Oh, will you? Well, if I was allowed to wear two hats, if I wore the scientist's hat, then what we have been tasked with is moving to a low-carbon future. And if this miracle cure worked, and I suspect it wouldn't, but let's imagine it did work, then from a low-carbon perspective, provided that was in line with the 2 degrees C framing that civil society has given us, fine, wonderful, that's perfectly reasonable. If I then took off my science hat and put on my citizen hat as a normal member of the global population, then I would not like that as a prospect. I think there are lots of more, a bit like Paul says, there are lots of more creative ways of thinking of a more positive future. So I think responding to climate change may open us up to be more dynamic, creative individuals or creative society than not responding to it. But I think I have to be quite careful which hat I'm wearing. If I'm asked to advise policymakers, I think it's appropriate that I come with my expertise in relation to what I work on in detail and not try to colour that with my own political concerns, my citizenry concerns, recognising all the time that scientists are human, so we inevitably are influenced by that. But I think we have to be very careful when we engage with others. If we are claiming some expertise, then we do not abuse that position of expertise.
Environmentalists are very often criticised from a mainstream perspective for wanting to denier's choice, wanting to reduce the variety and take away our joys in life. Sort of question to the creative people in the circle here, that if we accept planetary boundaries and climate parameters, is that a barrier to creativity, or does that open creativity up more?
I think the question is not just for creative people. Most of people in life, in daily life, they spend their life they lose their life trying to win their life. I mean, they're working to get money. Of course, they get less money than they work, otherwise it doesn't work. They spend less time with their children they would like to spend, so education is also a major issue. And for what? To get the space to live, objects, because our civilization today is based on consumption. So we create objects we don't need. And if you look a regular Western house, you have 80% of totally unuseful objects that are kind of trace of your the fact that you get something, and you try to create a competition between people. he has that, I want the same. And everything is based on this model. And this was the model for the what we call the growth and economic growth. Most of people are not so happy in that model, in fact. And they think they are not happy because they don't have enough. The problem is, for instance, the hunger. We still have people who don't eat. It's not that they don't have something to eat. It's that they don't have access to a good quality food, for instance. And on the other hand, we have enough food on Earth to feed anyone. So there is a problem of balance, a problem of model. And the problem of model is precisely the job of the creative people to tell the right stories. And today we have a problem of story. The story I tell of my own life is based on a wrong model. It's based on competition, it's based on success by having some objects or some symbol of my success, and it drives people to madness, it drives people to sadness and loneliness. That's why all artists are very interesting, because they can generate value, and sometimes money, but more value than money. They can generate value without any material that comes from the ground. I mean, you don't exploit the soil, you exploit the imagination, you exploit what makes you a human, and from zero you create something. From absolutely nothing you create an idea, an image, a concept, a story. And I think this is a kind of model, because the new economy will be based on unmaterial value and not just objects and competition to get these objects. So I think, of course, the climate change is a major issue, but it's also a major opportunity to think about the model that drives us to this situation, and to solve the situation by changing the model.
Cedric, so and do you find more interesting stories that could work for today, as well as those curious and interesting examples of early technology when you look into the past?
First, to follow your thoughts, there is this gross happiness index. They work in the Bhutan on the level of having money instead of having happiness in your life. And I think we need this calculation. We need the people studying this and showing what is the model. In technology, I think we have everything. The problem is to share. There is some people there making some good practice about this. There is some good people well practicing something. And I think the tool to share, like you do for the cities, is really important. Because when you show to the people there is something happening there and you have a model, then the people get into. Also in the cities or, for politics, they are afraid to make the first. But if the people, the neighbor makes something, they make the same. So I think we have everything. It's just a question of sharing and distributing the knowledge too.
Ewan.
Yeah. What I want to say, it's I'm finishing a book about 1945 White Sands research. That's why it's. And what I realize, and I'm kind of also critical of some kind of left optimism that is also very much involved in the creative world today. We still have a national front that has the same numbers as the NSDAP in July 1932. We have climate wars. We have all kind of problems around the world that are rising and rising more and more. And if you compare still to like the utopia they were in the 30s, because I'm like deep working into some scientists in the 30s in California Institute of Technology particularly, they were having such a lot of great ideas, great will to do problem changing, like the Dust Bowl climate problem in the Middle West, in US, in the Grape of Wars, John Steinbeck. So they were working on dunes and sand and how to solve this one of the first climate catastrophe really in the modern capitalism. So they would have like a lot of great ideas, but then you have also some other problem rising, like fascism. So after some years, you see those scientists, they move to, okay, now we have to work science for war. So I have a kind of schizophrenic also problem. I work for a maker magazine and hackers, and it's all about always like problem solving, do-it-yourself culture, how to solve things. But also, as you said, like more and more objects, more and more waste, like even 3D printing plastic. It's still waste, it's still plastic. So we, like at the 104 Zone Action Climat, there is like this exhibition, makers do a lot of ideas of how to change the situation, how to create new technology or new objects. But in the meantime, we have all these war issues, fascism rising. So what will be next 2 years? What will be, maybe we will not even have time to talk about all these positive thoughts. So I'm just worried about this, creativity great, but global policy is also, I mean, maybe because this week we have the COP21 and French election, which is such a great idea to put elections the same week of the COP. So, some thoughts.
It's interesting that since the financial crisis, one of the consistent messages that we've had in the UK, and I'm sure it's been similar elsewhere, that there's almost been a patriotic duty to go out and shop to make the economy work again. And over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, one of the largest growth industries in the UK is domestic storage units, because we've got nowhere to put all the stuff that we've been told to go and buy that we then don't use and leave in the box and end up paying more money to store it where we'll never see it again for the next 5 years. But I know Kevin wanted to come back in.
Well, because I think it's always important when you have these sorts of discussions to have elements of disagreement. So I just want to take the creative industries to task to some extent here. We talked about Zola earlier. I think my understanding of Zola, he had a fairly high consumption lifestyle, from what, particularly as he got more successful. We've heard the other day in Paris, we had the wonderful celebrities flying over here in their private jets to talk about climate change, with a whole suite of sycophants that went along there to listen to what these people who have carbon footprints that are the same as a small African country have to say about climate change. My concern is that with the creative industries, they produce wonderful things out of thin air, out of nothing, and then live very high consumption lifestyles if they are very successful. So whether it's Damon Hirst, whether it's the Beatles, whether it's Zola, we do not seem to have very successful artists who become well known and then do not follow the same trappings that their art may be criticizing. So I think we need some examples from the creative industry, not just about good creative output, but about them living lives that are in line with actually what their creativity may be talking about. And that's where we lack, what we lack. We lack those sort of role models. So in the creatives may well be producing interesting artifacts or interesting stories or narratives, but they also need to demonstrate living that lives themselves. And I think that's the same for us as scientists. We need to demonstrate that. And at the moment, what we lack within the wealthy parts of the world is almost everyone falls into the same trap of following the same consumerist patterns. They always accept the higher salary. They aren't prepared to forgo that salary and live life. They want to be above everyone else, whether that's an artist, a scientist, or a football player, or a banker.
And for those of you who don't know Kevin better, to back up his remarks, when he was invited some time ago to attend a conference in China, he took the train. And I think found it quite an interesting and life-changing experience as well. And I saw Arnold Schwarzenegger getting quite a lot of attention here in the last couple of days. This is the same Arnold Schwarzenegger, who one of whose hedge funds had investment in kind of Indonesian logging companies that are devastating rainforests around the world. Paul, you wanted to come in.
Well, I think we've also got to remember the number of creative industries that are deployed in making us buy more stuff and making us think about stuff as important. But then we've also got to recognize that even though we hear about climate change on the documentaries, all of the characters we're surrounded by, the two-dimensional friends we have in our lives and all the films and television plays, are very, very rarely ever seen talking about these issues or saying, let's take the plane, let's not fly. Or when do you ever see George Clooney collecting his urine in order to put it on the garden? It's just not happening. Those narratives aren't happening in the media that we're surrounded by. So we need to push through those barriers like we did with race and like we did with gender and start talking about these issues in the plays, in the television series, in the films and in the gaming world. Because as we project the next 10 or 20 years, I've been spending time looking at how we do that. Almost unilaterally, whenever there's a play, a television set in 10 or 20 years' time, it's ecological collapse and dystopia, which just pushes us into a position of fear. Quite often, the population are replaced by zombies, so that if you're blowing their heads off with a gun as you're escaping with the medicine for the child on the farm, it doesn't matter because they're zombified. And if they're going, no, don't take that medicine, we need it here, then it wouldn't work as a story. So we have to break in and rethink the future and take people to a new future where we're actually rising to these challenges, but where we're also looking at the additional benefits, not having to buy stuff you don't need to impress people you don't like with money you don't have, having cleaner air in cities, having better diets that isn't just meat all the time. All sorts of co-benefits can come with this that can give us a new sense of collective purpose, and that can be quite exciting.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm going to ask my colleagues around the table here one more question, and then I'm going to see if anybody who's sitting around listening in so patiently and quietly, if you'd like to throw any questions at our speakers. So the one question I'm going to put to everybody, now this might be something which is an innovation, but it might be a social innovation or a technological innovation. If you were to pick one potentially genuinely transformative innovation, specifically related to climate change, what would it be? Let's start with you.
I think it would be citizen power. It would be citizen governance, because everything that happened in the industry now, in the 5 last years, Facebook, Google, Uber, Netflix and so on, they are huge players today, and they didn't exist 10 years ago. They didn't exist at the beginning of the century, and they totally changed. They shifted the economic paradigm in very few time. And at the same time, we have the same political structures that are discuting at COP as if they had choice. And they are choosing for us. And I can't choose a car like this with my iPhone or go anywhere in the world and have a flat very quickly and not be able to take a decision so important for my kids, but for everyone. So I think the next innovation, if COP doesn't work, the people will ask something. Say, it's not possible. I can't just be a witness of that. So I think it's social innovation permitted by technology, because we are all connected, and that has to show some results, because the regular governance system can't give us more than +3 degrees.
So the newest innovation might be one of the oldest calls of all, power to the people. Who else has got one they'd like to go for? Cedric.
I proposed in a workshop some months ago to have a new audiovisual office in France, because we have this CSA that look for the media and look also the level of the politics in the TV, etc. So I think the media, radio, TV, newspaper have a great responsibility in this problem. So it makes sense also, because the citizen, if you put shit inside the brain, so they will take wrong decision. So I mean, if we want to change something, we have to change the main media. If not, you can have the best solution over the world, the best citizen mechanism. If you put shit inside the brain, the solution will be not there anyway. So I think we have to really put the light on the media and the responsibility of these people really, really close, really quickly.
Thank you. I believe putting shit inside the brain is also very unhygienic, and I wouldn't recommend it. Paul?
Well, on one hand, we have solar photovoltaic, which has just got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to the point where it's becoming a very disruptive technology, a bit like Uber and Airbnb, because solar's distributed pretty equally around the world and anybody can have energy wherever they want. I spoke to one of the original pioneers of PV and he said, I never, ever expected it to get this cheap, and it's getting cheaper. So it really is disrupting it, and it's much more equally distributed. But on the other hand, we've got, well, let's just switch the telly off. Let's play music together. Let's just talk together. Let's spend more time with the kids. Let's go out in the park. Let's cycle. All the things that we actually want to do, let's just start doing them.
Fantastic. Just do it. Kevin?
I would go for a personal carbon allowance. So that would be that everyone would be allocated a small card or something like that, that when you bought some petrol or some fuel, or you went on a bus or a train or a plane, your carbon allowance would be removed, some of your allowance would be removed. And the amount of your allowance would be set by the women that live in the Association of Small Island States. So that they would set the allowance for those of us that live in the Northern Hemisphere.
Ewan?
I would like something very utopian, like rewriting the law of the air, which is, you know, today is the aviation law. And since I showed this balloon aerosol fully, like no gas, yeah, we set a petition. It's aerocine.com website, you can find it. But it's to rewrite the law of the air, like it will be like an Antarctica Treaty or the Space Treaty, or and something, to
Perfect. Thomas?
Yeah, I also think there is something really important is to change the economical engineering. And so it's not just about technology and stuff, but it's about why the money is used for, and if we can make the right ideas and the big amount of money if they meet. So I think the change is really possible. And yeah, I'm just thinking I have heard like that now in Mexico they just put a tax on the sugar, like in the Coca-Cola stuff and all the things, because even if the sugar is also related to the health problem, and now it's not officially recognized, but more and more as the tobacco or other things. And I think there is a lot of money to take in some economical process and to create new investment funds to serve the right projects and right ideas.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, for my part, I would recommend we move to a new social norm of a 3-day working week so that we have time to be citizens and lead more ecological lives. Let's throw it open to the people who've been very, very patiently listening and see if we've got any questions. They can be as random as you like, but try to keep them short so we can have as many as possible and we can pass a microphone around. This is going to completely ruin how all the cameras have been set up, but never mind. Unless you'd like to come and stand over here. Yes, sir. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us if you are from an organization or where you come from?
Sure, my name's Yannick. I work at the University of Leeds in the UK, not far from Kevin. So my question was more calling back to a point that Kevin made before about when he's advising governments and he has to put his scientist hat on and remove his citizen's hat. I'm wondering, where does the citizen's advice on climate change for politicians come from? Because most of the people who serve as the political advisors of it, and a couple of them are my friends, unfortunately, they come from generally in the UK background. You know, they'll do something like PPE at Oxford or whatever, and then they'll go and get a job advising in politics, and they won't really care about this issue, unfortunately. But the people who do care about it and are sufficiently knowledgeable about it to talk about it and offer advice are the scientists, but they feel obliged to restrict themselves purely to the science. I'm wondering if we are going to go down that route, who does provide that citizens' angle in the advice that politicians receive?
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. I'll take another couple before we come back to everybody. And precisely on your point, it's interesting that in the United Kingdom, we've just appointed a new head of our environment agency who seemingly has no track record in the environment at all. So let's see, are there any other questions that we could take now? It's easier for us to take 2 or 3 in one go. Don't be shy. You've got a little question itching at the back of your brain. You know you want to ask it. If not, we'll just go back to that question because it is fairly fundamental. Oh, we have another question over here. And again, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Nicholas. I'm here. Don't represent anybody or anyone. I'm just here for personal purpose.
You can represent yourself, that's fine.
Yeah, that's it. And I was wondering, many people doesn't want to change, and how to change their habit to consume less carbon, and that's my question, how to change someone who doesn't want to change.
That's an excellent point, because a lot of the research in behavioral economics tells us that we can easily adapt to radically different lifestyles without sacrificing our well-being, but the idea of change is like a bump in the road. It's quite hard to get over. So 2 big questions there, which get right to the heart of this. Who's whispering in the ears of our politicians, and how did they get there, and how can we change them? And how can we make change more attractive and seemingly possible? Who'd like to kick off first? We'll go with Paul.
I think one of the things we need to do is to look at how we've learned from the changes that we've done in the past. Looking back to the sort of comedy that was prevalent in the 70s, that if people told those jokes now, people would go, oh my God, you can't say that. Or the sort of attitudes we had, and to see that the changes have happened through improving social norms and through actually linking ourselves together better. So by learning from the past, I think we can see that change continually happens. The world isn't static, the world isn't staying the same, the world is changing all the time, whether we like it or not, with all sorts of disruptive new technologies. There's all sorts of new S-curves about to unleash on us. What we have to do is say, let's make those changes happen for the benefit of the people within the limits of what the planet can take.
Okay, thanks. Who'd like to pick up the next one? Work round, go to you, Kevin.
Well, the first one about the politicians, I think, again, as scientists, we are citizens, so we can comment on that, but only really as one of the 60 million people in the UK, or one of in the constituency that person may be the MP, the representative for. So I think it is the role of the politicians to assimilate. Well, firstly, they should have their own views, their own leadership. I don't think they should just go by focus groups and what their electorates say. It's more than just about being representative. There's some leadership in there as well. Nevertheless, I think it is important that they have a better balance between who it is that they listen to. At the moment, they listen to the head of BP or some star that has flown in for the day. It's to the great and good. If you don't earn £1 million a year, the politicians, or at least the senior politicians, the ministers, will not listen to you. Now, having said that, I think in the UK at the moment, and I apologise, it's a very UK focus here, we have a new leader of the opposition. Now, whether people like him or do not like him, he has a very different relationship with the population within the UK. And I know lots of people who do not like what he stands for, but actually really like how he is doing the politics of today. Now, whether that changes things fundamentally, I don't know, but he is much more open to wider discourse from a much wider array of citizens within the UK. So I think that's a much more hopeful model of politics. That at the same time, we have to bear in mind that our politicians all come from the same background. They've all done PP at Oxford, and they've probably been to Eton as well. So there is a real problem that they only communicate with people like themselves. So at the moment, they are unreasonably influenced by lobbying groups. You have some disagreement, maybe we can get onto that. But just the second one is that we have to remember we always change. Society is, well, modern society is always changing. Firstly, we've normalised change if it always occurs. And I think I would probably maybe slightly disagree with Paul there. My understanding is that if you look at the Egyptians or the Romans, the Babylonians, they ran a model for many hundreds, if not in the Egyptian case, thousands of years. And there was very little difference. They took the model to further places. They took over other countries, but they applied broadly the same model. That's not what we've done with the modern contemporary society. Ours is premised on increased production, increased consumption of material goods by all the people in the system. So it's fundamentally different, I think, to previous ones. But nevertheless, if we had low carbon guidelines, it could evolve within those. And that is the role of government, to set those guidelines up. And we have those at the moment in some respects, but they're incredibly weak. So I think if governments set those in train, then that would at least, well, I think it would drive the innovation process. I actually believe regulations drive innovation much more than actually competition does.
For the question for changing and the people and the living style, etc., I think we also have to look in the biology and the bacteria we are, because the bacteria is always trying to keep more energy, to eat more, etc. And even if the reason said you have to have a low impact, you have to make this and this, our bodies, our genetics try always to have more, you know, you need more and more always. I think it's inside our DNA. So I think what can be interesting is to mix the biologists and the biotechnologists around the table and try to understand the mechanism and how to explain to the people, your body want to do this, but your mind want to do this, and also looking for new way to storytelling all the things you feel in your body, you know, because I think it's the best way to approach this change.
I thought I will agree on the need to know more about life science, that's for sure. I also work in the field of art and biology, and to know more about marine biology, like coral reefs and acidification of oceans, and life in the oceans is definitely something that can teach us. And to come back on another level about lobby, I think the military-industrial complex is also a big lobby. When we talk about acceleration, you know, we call this this great acceleration in the Anthropocene Stratigraphic Committee, and it started in 45, and in 45 it's also the installment in US, for instance, of the RAND, Research and Development Corporation, under private sector instead of public committee of advisor from scientist point of views and more reasonable people than actually private sectors that actually want to go on and sell more or arms or oil or everything that can help their business. So I think dismantling some part of the military influence on politicians and on the private sector, this business between Iroquois, Halliburton and American Army, or now France and the builders of weapons. I think France had the best year of selling weapons this 2015. So, and the war in Syria now. So I just saw Jeremy Corbyn on Monday with Naomi Klein. I wish we would have a socialist leader these days in France.
A little bit of politics there to finish off with. Excellent. We'll go to Yassine. And then to round off, what I think I'm going to do is ask my colleagues, while we listen to Yassine, to think of a question they might like to ask of one of each other that you might not know. Oh, we have another question. We have another question over here that we can throw in. So we'll hear from Yassine, and then we'll come to you. And if anybody else has thought of anything they'd like to ask, we still have a few minutes left, so don't worry. So, yes.
So very quickly about the change, who get the change, how to make that the people want to change. You have to make the change sexy. It's very simple. In fact, if you change the competition model or the value, what is important, you change the currency of, in fact. The currency is no more, the most important currency is no more money, but something else, maybe empathy. I love the example of some recent social media that didn't exist 5 years ago, like Instagram. On Instagram, you have people spending a lot of time, a lot of energy, and creating a real value. And if you propose to these people a new something, I don't know, in a car or something material, or to erase the amount of energy they spend to create this unmaterial value, I think we could be surprised. I'm not surprised, because they would keep what they build. And the social relation that we created in the last 5 years that are very, very powerful. In the same time, they can create terrorist networks. And in the same time, they can also create human networks. And so this is the beginning of the change, because we created a connected collective power that can inform, that can create, and that produce, of course, that produce carbon because of the servers, but less than the current system. So if people want, if they have, it's not something that you take off, but something that you add, and this is a new model. I think it will be totally natural.
Thank you, and that's one of the great sort of themes and struggles in environmental economics, this sort of challenge, the great promise of dematerialization of the economy. But again, as the great E.F. Schumacher, author of Small is Beautiful, said that it can take you so far, and he says we can sure enough eat further down the food chain, but we cannot eat recipes. We're still trapped within the material economy at some level. And so we had a question who seemed, here we are, yeah.
Hi there, my name is Kika Thorne, and I'm an artist from Toronto, and I try to live a low carbon lifestyle, and I live a very full, amazing lifestyle that way. I do find that institutions aren't that interested in artists that opt out of the art system. They're more interested in people that actually accrue, make, and participate in how do you call it? Well, just the well-off begats more attention, whatever. But it's a bit irrelevant, because I was wondering if we could sort of play with this as a possible space for, I don't know, like I have something that I would like, and as an artist, I actually don't know how to access it. And this thing that I would like is to not necessarily shut down a geoengineering conversation, because I think that as somebody, my practice is working with magnetism and elasticity, or thinking through magnetism and elasticity, and working with some, materials made by outrageous organizations like DuPont, but using the thinking around the table of elements to ask the question how to separate carbon from oxygen. This happens all the time. Obviously, photosynthesis is a key factor in how we're going to survive. So my question is, if cadmium, chromium, arsenic, mercury, these are the toxins that are going into the air, if they're so much bigger, everything from 24 to 80 in the 80s, if they're so much bigger on the table of elements than carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, which are the things that we would like to cherish and clean and keep around and help us keep around, and actually, by us I mean all life. I'm just curious, can we not produce a nanofiltration system that will allow us to, separate, that's all. Separate and then recombine. So maybe we have to separate the water from, air, air is complex, but we have to, in terms of water filtration, we have to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, and then it can recombine again, as it naturally will. But I'm just, as an artist, thinking through these things, who doesn't actually have access to a scientist who's kind of living inside a, artist's bubble, right?
Well, let's put that question. Let's take that question. It's a very good one. Let's. I mean, he's not a chemist, but let's ask Kevin. What do you make of that? And then we'll come to you.
I can tell you some machines exist that separate carbon oxygen to make some engine, but it's use a lot of electricity to reach that thing.
There's a law in thermodynamics that relates to something called entropy, and the problem with anything that we do, we will effectively end up using more energy to do it than the benefit that we can gain from it. So if that energy is related to, for instance, just what comes from sunlight, then you could argue that we are working within the resources that are provided to the planet. If that energy is above the level that is actually coming in some way, and remember that we can't use all of that energy, it's been used for photosynthesis, it's been used for the rainforest, for keeping the planet warm, and so most of the energy from the sun is used for the other things that make life worth living, or live at all on the planet. So anything we use above that, like we burn coal or oil or gas to separate out these other materials from the air, then actually in doing that, we are causing disruption somewhere else. So we're taking coal and we are taking a material that is solid and concentrated. We are dispersing it by burning it, putting it up the chimney to allow us to concentrate somewhere else, some copper, some polonium, some uranium, some whatever it might be that we're trying to do, or mercury or whatever. So, we cannot have a perpetual motion machine. So the sort of basic laws of thermodynamics mean that we have to operate quite differently to how a lot of economists would think that we can actually always run the system in this sort of perpetual motion manner. But the laws of thermodynamics mean that is not the case. That's why you cannot make an engine an internal combustion engine can never be more than about 50 or 60% efficient. It's not that it's bad engineering, it's just the rules of science. And the rules of science here, the thermodynamic rules, are such that you have this entropy issue. So the best thing to do is to avoid putting those things into the air. And so rather than find out a technique that will allow you to remove the pollutants out of the air, the better thing to always do is to avoid putting the pollutants out there in the first place. That is always the lower energy route, it's always the lower environmental impact route. Now, I'm not saying, if I go back to your first point on geoengineering, I think it's really important that we undertake research on geoengineering. But in doing that research, when we then think about what we need to do for policies in terms of climate change, we have to always work with the assumption that the geoengineering will not work. And the problem is, as soon as you do research on geoengineering, the politicians and many of us just assume it will work because it allows us to carry on living a nice, easy life today. So we have to be more sophisticated here. We have to undertake the research because it is an insurance policy for the future. It probably will not pay out because it probably will not work. But we should undertake the research, but we should assume when we have negotiations like COP, that those geoengineering technologies will not work because they're very unlikely to be successful anyway. So I think we need a more subtle, more sophisticated, more nuanced approach to addressing these issues. So I'm not saying we should not do geoengineering research, but we have to be careful how we frame climate change around it.
Thanks, Kevin. One of the great failures, I spent a lot of time in the company of economists, and one of the shocking things is the degree to which they seem to think that economics can wish away the laws of thermodynamics, which the rest of life and everything has to exist by. And one of the great writers who crossed the bridge between arts and sciences, humanities and sciences, was a man called C.P. Snow, and he characterized those laws of thermodynamics, the first law saying that the first law of thermodynamics says you can't win, and the second law says you can't even break even. And we've got a few minutes left, and what I want to do now is just give each of my colleagues around the table a chance for a final thought. You may pick up on any of the questions, or if a new thought has come to you, please indulge that. Indulge it for 30 seconds to a minute, and then we will be finishing around about on time. It's been absolutely fascinating, and as I can see him smiling and nodding, I'm going to go straight to Paul to begin with.
Well, I have a question for the creative practitioners and the artists, really, because we're experiencing climate change as a symptom of a deeper problem. I'm an electrical engineer. I know that there is a hierarchy of problems. You've got to drill down to get to your fundamental problems before you'll sort the system out. You can tinker around the edges. Climate change is a symptom of a deeper problem, which is perhaps our addiction to fossil fuels, conspicuous consumption lifestyles. They are, I think, a symptom of a deeper problem still, which is our separation from each other and our separation from the natural world. How can we use the creative practice to begin to connect ourselves to each other across borders, across disciplines, across nations, and reconnect ourselves to the natural world so that we won't do the things that have the bad impacts in other parts of the world because we see that as part of ourselves?
Well, there's a simple challenge to answer in 30 seconds to a minute. Who'd like to go first? You'd like to go first?
Yeah, it's one of my teams actually. I think we are changing scale of perception of ourselves, and the perception of ourselves has its own history. Of course, we perceive ourselves as a body. If I see a mirror, I just see a body, so I think I am a body. But the cell living in my finger, maybe she doesn't know that she's connected, that the cell in my toe. And if they are both connected in something bigger, and if I cut my finger, I am just a finger. I think I am going to die. All my thoughts are concentrated on that cell. And the day we saw Earth from the space, we realized that we are part of an organism, and this organism is Earth. It means there is no difference between humankind and the whole humanity, the plants, the birds, all the animals, and the planet itself, because we can't live without it. This is the organism. This is the body. If I die, someone is living and will continue. And this organism is very old, and we contain in our DNA the message of our ancestors. So we are already all connected, and I think this is the reason why we created technology. Technology is not an innovation from one people, it's an innovation coming from an history, a human history, and there is no invention in the creation of the internet. This is something that comes from what we really are. This is the same structure, like the structure of our cells, the structure of our brain, and we are creating what we already are. So we are changing the scale of our perception. And if we change the scale of our perception, each of us in the same time is less, because I'm just a cell. But in the same time, each of us is very important, like the finger that you cut. So I can't imagine my life without thinking to the people on the small island. We see in the recent events that you can be a cartoonist in Paris, drawing for your friends, almost for your friends, and be killed for geopolitical problems, because everything is connected. So we change totally the way we express ourselves, the way we tell the stories, the way we think about the problem, and it gives us a kind of individual superpower, and in the same time in a very small place that is connected to the other. That's why I insist so much about the international citizenship. It's already ready technologically, and the people start to have this consciousness, and this is the creative crowd, the creative, you know, the how do you say, they represent almost 1/3 of the population. I mean, we don't work in a factory because robots work in factories, but we are all connected, and we spend a lot of time to be connected. So this is a totally new era and domain and land for artists and citizens to express themselves.
Thank you. It sounds like a strangely liberating dance between significance and insignificance, and my head is spinning in a quite nice way. You don't have to have a last thought, but if you do.
Question, yeah, it's a big one. Huh? Well, telling stories. Telling stories, it's something very important, because we need to rewrite our own history. So, and maybe we also need to leave the arrow of time concept, the notion of progress. Even the Anthropocene is about time. Kainos is time. So maybe we should think more to rewrite this history, and maybe also think maybe it's more special. I'm not so into like Earth as an organism, but because I think it's more porous. Life also is in the cosmos. You know, life comes from Earth. Even water, somehow can come from the cosmos. So I think the space is more porous. We can learn a lot from the deep sea and a lot from the space. and maybe leave this notion of progress, even in the theory of evolution, so to be more modest and less anthropocentric in that level.
Thank you. Thomas?
To add a little something, I think, as you said, the creative part is really important, but at the same time, the creative part is nothing without the scientific part and all the parts that are around and that feed the creative. And before, we had those people like Leonardo da Vinci. He was able to be at the same time an amazing painter, a scientist, the writer, everything at the same time. And I think that now we are that deep in each field that it's really difficult to be as good in this field and this field and this field. So that's why I think transdisciplinarity is really important, and between all those people so good in their own field, we need mediators, connectors, and to make the ideas coming from avant-garde art to avant-garde science and to used and to think outside of the box.
And also for this biologic approach, we all come from the sea, and we are connected to the sea. If we change the scale of the time, we came from the same point really quickly, you know. And I think also, like the Earth from the cosmos, the point of view is really important. I think if we change the scale of the time, sometimes we accelerate or we make slowly. For example, you can see the plants, they are leaving also the Earth. The rock is living, so when you change the scale of the time. So I think it's really important also to look for this intelligence in the nature. Really, for me, it's like a research, really interesting. And to look for this, René Quinton was one of the first submarine biologists in France. He revolutionized medicine, but nobody cares about this. He makes the connection between seawater and our blood. And really, I encourage all the people looking for René Quinton research. It's not Pasteur approach that want to kill the pathogen, but it should reinforce your bio-defense. And I think this is not in opposition. It's really complementary. And sometimes we make also before René Quinton for the Greek, and sometimes we opposite some stuff. You know, I think we have to be more complex in our approach. I think we have to create also semantic, new linguistic approach. You know, because we always talk about the same with old world, but the time is changing. It's more and more complex. So there was this linguistic lab around the Gaîté, lyrique and place to be. And it's really an interesting approach, you know, to reinvent the way we talk about the things also.
Thank you. I'm going to give a last word to Kevin. And as you were speaking, you reminded me of the words of Herman Daly, who lamented how we speak often of a war between man and nature, forgetting that if we won, we'd be on the losing side.
Well, coming back to this idea of being creative, again, there's a separation we already have here. We hear with the creative industries, but I think of science and engineering. And my closest friend, who's a builder of houses, he is creative as well. So the world is awash with creative people, and they don't just exist within the creative industries. Having said that, having spent a lot of my life working with engineers and scientists, we like to communicate our creation through PowerPoint slides, through graphs and numbers. And I'm not sure why the rest of the world hasn't been convinced by that, but clearly it has not. So I do think...
But you're not giving up.
I'm not giving up. Well, that's my form of communication. But having said that, I think it is really important now that that the creative industries provide narratives that can communicate the sort of discussions that we're having in science and engineering and complement those. Now, those narratives might be in mime, they may be in dance, they may be in music, song, stories, plays. I'm not sure what, they can be in any form they need to be, but we need to find some way to engage the wider civil society. And I don't just mean the people out there, I also mean ourselves as well, because we are not good, we have bought in psychologically to these issues, but we have not bought in empathetically to these issues. We do not lead by example in our own lives. We're normally very high emitters, even when we think we're low emitters. The other thing I think is really challenging for the creatives is that I think we need to find some way of finding, not a narrative, a whole suite of narratives that also appeal to people who are on the right of the spectrum as well as on the left of the political spectrum. So we've got people like Naomi Klein who has tried to, who probably appeals quite strongly to people who lean slightly to the left, and she's been very critical of NGOs and other people there. But I think we need sets of narratives that appeal to people who lean gently to the right as well, and we don't have those at the moment. And I think it would be really useful if we could bring those people on board. And actually there are lots of shared concerns between that group and people who I would guess overall that represented those of us here. And then come back to your comment about being transdisciplinary. As someone who works in the centre where we try to expressly call ourselves interdisciplinary, I think there's an important distinction there. I think we no longer just have to work in teams with an engineer working with a social scientist, working with an artist, is that the engineer needs to become partly social scientist, partly artist, and that's interdisciplinary, and that takes time. And universities are very bad for that. That takes going out for a beer, having a coffee, spending time with people who have a different language altogether, not just French and English, but they talk in social science language or an arts language. And I think that will take time for us to do, but we have to achieve that. The problem, of course, at the end of all of this, in terms of climate change, we have very little time to deliver any of this at all. So in any of our narratives, they have to be very quick, and they have to somehow encourage us to accelerate our shift away from our current high-carbon, profligate lifestyles.
Thanks, Kevin. And you mentioning universities gives me the dim reminder that the most useful critical thinking about the dominant economic system we have at the moment seems to emerge more often out of geography departments and engineering departments than it does economics departments. And I think if we can imagine a world in which technology is our friend and not our master and inches us towards living in equilibrium with the biosphere that we have, we might end up in a situation, you know, that scene, it's a trope, it's a genre on television news whenever some new Mars probe has been sent and Houston is waiting for it to safely land and send its first beat back, and they go wild and crazy at headquarters. You imagine the ecstasy there would be if they did actually find a single microbe or a single blade of grass on another planet. If only we could translate that euphoria and joy and bewilderment at the wonder of life to the stuff that we're crushing on this one, we may be making some progress, and maybe technology has a role in that. Thank you everybody for coming and listening, for anybody who's listening to us online, to all my colleagues for your stimulating and incredibly varied presentations, and hopefully this conversation will continue here and after. So thanks again, and thank you for coming. Cheers.
Je crève l'instru et prends la sève. Parce que la vie n'est pas un rêve. Mes rêves sont que mes paupières s'élèvent. Grosse et intrépide, je marche à la vitesse où tu cours. Je t'attends au tournant pour faire des miennes à mon tour. Je me tiens à carreau, c'est juste le temps d'être carré mon pote. Mes sourires trop bien étalés, je suis navré, je viens saler ta cote. Moi je brille même gyrophare parce que je suis fier, reviens. Quand tout est clair, je me sens bien. Tant que je ferai lumière, je me vois loin. De loin vient mon influence, trajet de galérien. Tu penses, j'ai mes running et mon souffle qui testent mon endurance.
Just a few words to say, please don't leave. We have a